Thank you so much, Jay, and thanks so much also to the Cultural Knowledge Consortium for inviting me to speak. I'm just thrilled to be able to talk with you all today. And I have to also say thanks in particular to DoD's Minerva initiative for the funding that has made possible the research that I'll be talking with you about today. So I'm really thrilled to be here. So our Climate Change and African Political Stability Program, or CCAPS as we call it, is a research initiative based here at the Robert Strauss Center at UT, but it's a collaboration of over 50 researchers representing 14 universities. So it's very much a collaborative initiative I'm very privileged to speak with you about today. And our central focus is really analyzing the security implications of climate change and our capacity to respond, both at the national level in countries in Africa and at the international level as international actors. So certainly this is a broad research agenda, which I'll cover just briefly with you today, but I'd really like to focus most of my discussion on our dynamic mapping efforts, which have been really a key, they've played a key integrating role for our work here in bringing together many lines of our research. Because without question, the pathways or potential pathways from climate change to security impacts require new data sets that we've been compiling, but they've also required really creative thinking about how we present this research and present these data sets in a way that they can be of most utility to the broadest possible spectrum of actors in policy and working on these issues in the field as well. So for us, integrated dynamic mapping has helped us to do that and has helped us bring together our different lines of research, and we hope that will be of use to the policy community. So just briefly as a way of situating our work, I'll just mention really the impetus for our research stemmed from several areas where there were data gaps, I guess, for lack of a better phrase, where we needed more information to be able to analyze these questions of climate change and security. And of course, it's well researched that Africa is one of the regions that is most vulnerable to climate change, but there were considerable questions remaining on which parts of Africa are most vulnerable and how are they vulnerable to different drivers of climate change, and what intervention strategies may have the most impact in addressing those. And secondly, in terms of potential national response capacity, we knew that U.S. assistance has been successfully building governance capacity, and in fact it has been shown to have the most impact in Africa out of global studies. But we had less information on which kinds of democratic assistance programs are most effective and how can they be designed to respond to different contexts, and what kinds of constitutional and governance structures may be most effective in absorbing and responding to shocks most effectively. And thirdly, in terms of international response, we had very vague figures in terms of international aid for climate change adaptation. So our focus has really been trying to get a handle on how much aid has been spent on climate change adaptation and how is that being targeted, and is it being targeted as effectively as possible to respond to climate security risks. So that translates into 4 core areas of research for us. The first looking at how we get a more fine-grained understanding of vulnerability to climate change, and the second looking at how that vulnerability is potentially related to conflict. And we've also sought then to assess national and international capacity to respond. So I'll provide just a quick overview of each of these 4 areas so that you have a sense of the kind of data and research that we are aiming to integrate through dynamic mapping. In the first area of research, looking at climate security vulnerability, we have 2 research teams, one looking at African countries and localities' current vulnerability to climate security risks. And this modeling brings together not only the environmental hazards that may increase due to climate change, but also how these environmental factors intersect with demographic pressures, socioeconomic dynamics, and governance capacity that may all contribute to an area's overall composite risk to climate security factors. And our second research team in this area looks at climate projections and has developed a regional climate projection model for Africa that provides mid-century projections, really to better align with policy planning horizons and ultimately provide more accurate projections for Africa than are provided for by the global models. So in this research area, our ultimate goals are really to identify the areas currently most vulnerable to climate change and how those vulnerabilities may be shifting in the future. So a second core area of our research, of course, is around the links between climate change and conflict, or potential links. And this involves two conflict data sets. The first is our social conflict in Africa data set, which is a new data set that really aims to systematically track a broad range of social and political unrest. So everything from spontaneous and organized demonstrations and riots to extra-governmental violence and coups and events like this that really were not systematically tracked in other conflict data sets that heretofore had really focused on civil and international conflict. And our second data set, the ACLA data set, actually pre-existed the CCAPS program, but we worked with the leads on that to expand its focus continent-wide in Africa and also to bring the conflict tracking into real time. So the leads on that research effort now are collecting conflict data continent-wide in Africa daily, and we update that on our site and our dynamic mapping tool monthly. And so both of these conflict data sets are continent-wide, but are also expanding and have coverage outside the continent as well. SCAD is currently expanding to include all of Latin America and the Caribbean and the Middle East, and so we'll be posting that by the end of the year. And ACLED also has coverage of other global hotspots. So, and both of these conflict data sets also offer disaggregated data, so we can explore it in the mapping tool or other formats by individual actor or types of actors, like militias, which are on the rise in Africa, types of events, types of issues that are associated with particular events. So this really gives us a good ability to look at conflict trends and examine changes in those over time. And the last thing I want to point out here is that the ACLED team has also been working to develop a new typology for complex emergencies, and really how we might start to distinguish those in a systematic way from simply protracted conflict. So that's something I will talk a little bit more about in a minute as well. So, and our third area of research is looking at national governance capacity. And this area of research is almost all qualitative. So it consists of 4 sets of case studies looking at countries' constitutional design, their developments in government capacity and democracy assistance in those countries, and then also their disaster response capacity, both at the national level and at the local level in urban environments. So our efforts through these case studies is to take a comparative approach at what's working in African countries and international efforts to support capacity development in those countries. And really looking at, then how can we extrapolate lessons from these case studies that may have continent-wide applications. And then our fourth area is, of course, looking at our international capacity to respond to the challenges seen related to climate change in Africa. And this team has been focusing on better tracking aid for climate change adaptation. And of course, to be able to do that, they have had to look really at the universe of all development aid to see which projects within there are actually focused on adaptation. So they have started with Malawi as a case study country, where they've been able to code the locations of all available donor projects for over 30 donors within that country. And then they have gone through and applied coding to all of those projects that determine which activities are related to climate change adaptation. So, of course, this gives us a very fine-grained analysis of what kinds of aid projects and which donors are focused on climate change adaptation and where within the country. And so this project is currently scaling up to cover several donors continent-wide. So with all of these diverse areas of research under one umbrella, under CCAPS, clearly a core challenge has been integrating these different lines of research and making the data available in a way that can be utilized by diverse stakeholders who ultimately may need it for many different purposes, and on a time frame that where they made it for day-to-day analysis. So our dynamic mapping efforts have sought to combine all of our data sets as well as other organizations' data sets that may be of interest to consider in conjunction with ours into one place, so that we can really leverage many different kinds of data and many different disciplines to examine these issues. So this, we hope, allows us to explore many different questions that can't be answered by one discipline alone. So I'd like to take us through a few of these questions just to highlight what we're trying to do with the mapping tool. So the CCAPS mapping tool, this is just a screenshot of that, integrates our data sets on climate and conflict and aid all in one place. So we can use this to explore questions like how conflict patterns are changing over time. So this is just several screenshots from our mapping tool that look at activity by the Lord's Resistance Army, the LRA, in Uganda and the region. So as we see in the second half of the 1990s, LRA activity is very localized, of course, within Uganda, and then gradually over the following decade it starts to diffuse across Uganda's borders. So we can look at then how this relates to other instabilities like climate-related vulnerabilities. So these are snapshots of the same area, simply overlaid with our climate security mapping. So this shows that, as these conflict events and conflict actors have diffused outside of Uganda, they are diffusing into areas with less stability and more climate insecurity. And the dark brown areas signify greater climate insecurity and more vulnerability due to climate-related factors, where the lighter yellow areas indicate areas of less vulnerability. So we see that these conflict events are gradually diffusing into areas where communities are already facing challenges due to climate security issues. So certainly we don't want to imply causality here between conflict and climate issues, but simply that these are two co-occurring instabilities in many communities and present dual challenges for security and development. So this is just one example of how we can use the tool to look at major shifts over time, but we can also look at real-time trends given the nature of our conflict data. So we can use a tool, say, to look at al-Shabaab moving into Uganda or current developments in Mali, and search by individual actors or individual types of events that we may be interested in. But we can also look at how these real-time conflict trends intersect with factors like aid. So this is another screenshot from our dashboard, our mapping tool, that aims to look at how conflict events and development aid projects intersect. So in this snapshot, the red points are conflict events, and specifically one type of conflict, violence against civilians. And the gray dots are aid project locations. And so we see, let's see if I can get this little pointer to work, in several areas. Here, they overlap. There are conflict events in the same location as aid projects. Here, they're also, very closely associated here as well. So, this allows us to look at how certain types of conflict that may have a important impact on the success of development projects may impact those projects. So violence against civilians, of course, is a key barrier to development in conflict-affected countries. So being able to track which kinds of actors are involved in these events and trends in their activity can help us in thinking about how best to structure development projects. So, for example, we've been talking with the CDC, who are now using our real-time conflict data in their polio eradication campaign in Nigeria, knowing when to send out their aid workers and when not to in different areas. So this is just one example of how we hope that the data can be used, combining aid data with security data, in this case conflict data. Another example of looking at aid data with security data is looking at how aid projects intersect with climate security risks. So this is a screenshot here of the location of aid projects. You'll see all of the different points, pink and green and blue and yellow, represent different aid projects, and each color is associated with a different donor. I guess I should have included the legend there. So we can see where aid projects are located, and as you'll see here with the this pop-up box that appears when you hover over a point on the map, it shows information about that aid project. So what kind of project it is, what sector it's aiming to address, who's implementing the project. And then we can overlay this map with, again, our maps of climate security. So to see where projects are being allocated on what types of issues in conjunction with where climate security risks are greatest. So again, the darker brownish or dark yellow indicates areas of greater climate security vulnerability, and the lighter areas, lighter yellow areas, are areas with less climate vulnerability. So we can see how aid projects are allocated across a country and across varying areas of vulnerability. And so, for example, we're working right now with the disaster planning unit in the Zambian government to integrate some of this climate security mapping in their allocation of aid projects and government planning efforts as well. So, given this detailed information that we have about aid projects, of course, that allows us to see how aid is allocated across a region, across sectors, across demographics within a country. So we can see where aid projects are being targeted within a country, and perhaps even select certain types of projects to see how well aid is being deployed to meet particular needs. So through the mapping tool, for example, we could select just agricultural projects, or even projects that have particular types of activities in them, say crop diversification or other specific agricultural related activities, and overlay that with data from other sources on, say, on issues related to food security. So the proportion of household expenses spent on food, and see within a country how well aid is being targeted on specific issues to meet particular needs in a local community. So we hope that this will help with analyzing whether project locations align with the needs of a particular community, and help, of course, with donor coordination and planning efforts, as shown here with this pop-up box here that appears, when you hover over a point, you can see that all of the different colors here represent different donors, and they're all working in the same location, and so we hope that this information will also support their efforts to coordinate their projects. So all told, we see a lot of potential for dynamic mapping in the field of climate security. We are working with a number of collaborators to hopefully put this platform to use in collaboration around security issues. For example, right now we have been talking with UNECA about how we might adjust the tool to be of greatest use with their extensive NGO network, that they could use the information in their advocacy efforts on climate change adaptation. We've been talking with UNEP about using the data and the tool in planning their adaptation projects in conflict-prone regions. So again, we just hope that the ability to integrate data from these many different sources and different disciplines and issues can help us take a very holistic, sort of multifaceted look for multifaceted decisions. And certainly the challenge in building a tool like this is providing a framework that lends itself to both accessibility to a broad set of data, but also accurate interpretation. We've designed the tool to minimize opportunities for users to draw erroneous conclusions. So for example, we can't show two conflict data sets at the same time if they include similar events or the same events, so that we don't, in effect, sort of double the impression that we're giving of a location's vulnerability to conflict. But we are planning and thinking about several additions to the dynamic mapping tool that may help us and help users really better assess connections between points on a map. So we're looking at perhaps the integration of geospatial analytics that could help assess the correlations between things that we're displaying on the map, and also help prevent implying correlation where there is none. And we're also looking at how to perhaps integrate assessments of uncertainty, and this will be particularly important as we start to integrate more of our team's climate projection. Certainly in development, and we are just eager for feedback continually, so because we're updating and adding more information, certainly adding more data all the time, but we're also have been rolling out what we call our dashboards. So the main mapping tool aims to integrate our many lines of research so that we can look at how aid and conflict and governance and climate issues intersect. We've also been starting to roll out thematic dashboards on each area under study in our program, so that we can really drill down into that area. So for example, here's a screenshot of our aid dashboard, which allows us to explore spending on development aid, both at the big picture level, looking at trends in aid, but also down to even the individual project information, which you can't see on the screenshot. Is below the map is a is the tabular data that supports every point on the map. So a user can filter by any information they want: actor type, event type, issue, and then see that data displayed on the map, on the graph, and then below the raw data, and they can click on that for more information. We have a similar setup to analyze conflict. Here's our conflict dashboard. And as I noted, that is updated monthly with new data, but the research leads on that also provide the data, and they work with key people in policy communities to provide that data on a more regular basis as needed, because they are collecting the data on a daily basis. And really, this is just our effort to put all of the information in one place in a very user-friendly format and provide relevant socioeconomic data as well to as layers that users can overlay there. So you can overlay the conflict data on relevant socioeconomic indicators like population density, poverty, data on marginalization of ethnic groups. Again, really just to sort of have a one-stop shop to be able to analyze conflict trends that we're seeing. And this is a sort of sneak peek, I guess, at our climate dashboard, which we'll be launching next month. And the effort here is to be able to allow users to analyze the climate modeling that our research team has been working on, and also to be able to re-weight the model. So our vulnerability team has, after extensive analysis and vetting of the model, evenly weighted each of the inputs that contribute to the model. But maybe users want to explore what overall vulnerability would look like if you gave a higher weight to population density. Maybe somebody thought in some area governance capacity is really the most important factor. They could use this tool to explore that and see how changing these weights impacts our understanding of overall vulnerability in an area. And lastly, I just want to make a nod to our efforts ultimately to focus on sustainability of this research. So another related tool that we've developed to make the outcomes of this research more accessible and sustainable is a coding interface. So our aid coding team, of course, has been doing this effort to code development aid projects according to their relevance to climate change adaptation. So we've developed this interface in partnership with our partner Development Gateway that aims to create this open source platform where anybody can do this. So ideally, we will transition this work to donors themselves so that they could start coding their own projects for their relevance to climate change adaptation in the same very detailed, granular way that we have to hopefully sustain this work and continue to make this research available and on a much broader level. And so this coding interface also is joined with Development Gateway's geocoding interface, which allows, it's also open source and allows people to code aid projects for their location. So again, ultimately we want this work to be able to be sustained by people other than us. So. And I guess I will just sort of close with links to our data, which is all searchable and downloadable online, and our mapping tool there, which is, of course, also available online. And we'll be continuing to release new installments of that, including the climate dashboard next month, and our publications. And we're very excited to be launching a new course module series that makes the research conducted by the program in each of these areas available as course modules. That initially we had designed them for the military education institutions in partnership with them, but we hope that they will also be able to be utilized at civilian education institutions as well. So those will be available on our website starting in the fall as well. So with that, I would love to answer any questions or address anything else.
Thank you very much, Ashley. Good presentation. We've got a bunch of questions coming in, so I'll go ahead and jump right into it. Here's one from Mark Noyes. He says, one of the predicted security issues that was a result from climate change was mass migration out of the Sahel into Europe or to the United States. Is there evidence that you've seen based on this that's occurred? And if so, I mean, maybe extend that a bit. what do you see as the impact of that mass migration?
Absolutely. I mean, this is something that several of our research teams have been looking at, both in terms of vulnerability to climate change and responses, and also as part of the effort to look at complex emergencies. And I think I should first say I would be happy to send some publications that a couple of our researchers have been working on in that regard. But I can also note that I think the thing that we've been focused on most and seeing, I guess, most evidence of is really circular migration more than international migration. And by that I mean migration from rural areas into urban areas within the country, and then migration back to the rural areas. And we've been very focused on how this is impacting poverty and vulnerability within urban communities, you know, and with the growth of these para-urban areas, the slums, and provision of services, this certainly, you know, contributes to considerations of political stability within countries as governments, you know, as population growth within cities may exceed government's capacity to respond, and as, you know, employment is not sufficient to you know, accommodate all of the urban growth. So that's been the main focus for us, is looking at how this circular migration is impacting political stability, and how it's related to you know, depleting resources in rural communities that certainly are impacted by climate-related factors, as precipitation and you know, as rainfall decreases and agricultural livelihoods are impacted. This is something we've been looking at quite extensively. So.
Okay, and moving on to the selection of data sets, Carl Prinzel writes in and says, is there any particular reason for the selection of aid or development projects in your examples as locations around which you focus the research? Is it an availability issue, or is it a focus on the LRA attacks, or what was the selection criteria?
Are you meaning in terms of for the aid projects? I'm not sure I'm not sure if callers can respond, but in terms of the aid projects, we selected, that research team selected Malawi as the initial pilot project because of the interest in the government to collaborate, because, you know, the availability of project documents is critical. So the actual coding process of identifying the locations of all of these aid project activities and their relevance to climate change adaptation requires the actual, you know, project documents related to that project from the donor and or from the government where the project is being implemented. So the government of Malawi was very interested in working with us on this, and our partner Development Gateway has a what they call an aid management platform in place there, which allowed us to collect the project documents for over 30 donors with you know, official development assistance projects there. So that was really, you know, we also had spoken with other governments that were interested, but they weren't interested in making the results public. So that was another consideration for us. We wanted all of the results of our research to be able to be open source. So in terms of the initial pilot project, it's absolutely willing partnership and availability of the foundational project documents that enabled us to start with that. And in terms of you know, perhaps the selection of just the particular screenshots, I mean, I think you know, our conflict data are continent-wide, and the ACLID data, which is what was shown there in the LRA example, dates back to 1997. The research lead on that, Kalina Raleigh, really didn't want to go earlier than that, just because the availability of reliable information really drops off before then, as I'm sure you all know as well. So that data set is from 1997 through today, literally. And and the LRA example is just sort of a fascinating one to me, and looking at how the tactics and the targeting of events by a conflict actor just changes so dramatically over time, and I think that is just an interesting example in looking at how one trend intersects with another in terms of climate security and conflict, and how that can impact local communities. So, but if I didn't hit the nail on the head with your question, please ask again.
No worries. And you spoke about willing partnerships as you were working on this pilot. Dr. Clara Metellitz, one of our Africa-aligned regional functional scholar, she writes in and says, can you provide some examples of how organizations, including government offices, have used this program?
Absolutely. So specific to DoD, we've worked with the Combined Joint Task Force, HOA, on ensuring that they have our real-time data, which they're looking at to analyze conflict trends in their area of operation. We've worked similarly with sharing the data with different offices and agencies within DoD. In terms of other collaborators outside of DoD, with whom we were not initially connected, I think there's just been a strong interest in this very granular data that is geo-referenced, because it allows institutions to analyze the issues that are in their mind, not just the issues that are in our mind that we write about through, our articles and, publications, et cetera. So I think this granular, accessible data, we've gotten a lot of traction with partnering with other organizations and using that. So as I mentioned, the UN Economic Commission for Africa is using it to work with their NGO network on, so that their NGOs have really extensive information about what climate change impacts are occurring in their local region, what climate change impacts are expected in the future, and that helps them, it sort of arms them with factual information that's specific to their locality that they can use in their advocacy efforts, both with their fellow citizens and with the government in their region. So we're really excited about sort of that cross-section of impact in working with multilateral organizations and individual citizens and NGO activists on the ground who are finding the information useful.
Great, thank you. And I've got an interesting, it's kind of a comment and a question from Dr. Jim Notwell. He's our regional functional scholar for geospatial issues. He says it's encouraging that you're exercising caution in allowing simultaneous display of various data sets, and that geospatial data is easily, even unwittingly, misvisualized and therefore misinterpreted, also unwittingly. Do you offer analytical services that could provide your interpretation of a set of variable distributions?
Well, we don't right now. We've been working closely with Esri on analyzing some of the questions we have about potential capabilities for geospatial analysis, and are hoping to sort of turn that, I think, into a little bit bigger project and start integrating that into the mapping tool, because we need that for our own sort of behind-the-scenes analysis, but we also want to make that available through the mapping tool as well. So not at this time, but we are looking into that. We really want to be able to analyze, perhaps through, say, geographically weighted regression, how various indicators are linked or not, and where different dynamics have an impact and where they don't. So those are capabilities that we're exploring right now and hoping to integrate into our own behind-the-scenes work and in a more formalized way, and also into the mapping tool over time, hopefully.
Okay, and I've got a question from Nick Parker coming in. It says, any chance the CCAPs will someday allocate resources to field work to validate or explain variation in your models?
It's a wonderful question. Yes. So we actually have done some pretty extensive ground truthing, particularly around the modeling, so around the climate security vulnerability model. The team has been to really every corner of Africa and talking with both policymakers, also practitioners and people on the ground about, to ground truth the model. So, this modeling shows that this factor or that factor are most important in this area or contributing most significantly to the overall vulnerability of this area. Is that your impression on the ground as well? Is that true? And that has been validating in many areas. It's also helped uncover areas where additional indicators could be helpful in the model. So, for example, after extensive ground truthing in the first couple years of our research, the team sought to evaluate how they could integrate and get better measures for drought and rainfall impact, which of course, anybody working in Africa, that's the great dearth of water data is always the key thing. But so working with partners in Africa has helped us, identify some new indicators that should be involved in the modeling. It's also helped sort of identify issues that we need to be considering. So the team has recently released a new version of the model, the 3.0 version, as it were, that includes a lot of this effort to ground truth the model in the field in Africa. So.
Great, thank you. And going back to the data sets and the spirit of openness and sharing, is it possible, what formats are available for the export of this data and the geocoded ACLAD data? XLS, what are the different formats, and is there a cost for access or using these data sets?
Oh, no, absolutely not. It's everything that we produce is completely open source and available for use by others. So the data sets are available for download. If you'll go to this first link listed on the PowerPoint slide here, that's our main data page, and it has links to all of our data sets, which are updated as soon as we update them. And they're available for download, certainly free of charge. We do ask downloaders to register just so that we can track who's using the data and sort of how far and wide it's being distributed. But we don't share that information with anybody, outside of our program. It's just more of a point of curiosity for us, I guess. So.
Great, appreciate that. And that pretty much wraps up our questions. Did you have some closing thoughts for us?
Gosh, I feel like I've covered a lot, speaking for a long time. I certainly would love to leave the door open for continued comments and thoughts and potential input and collaborations. If you all have thoughts on the mapping tool, how it could potentially be of greater use to your institution or efforts that you have underway, we certainly always have revisions ongoing to it. So would love to incorporate the input of people who are using it. So certainly I hope everybody will stay in touch if there's interest in our work.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, everybody.